Baptist church people left because they couldn't do anything, because they were thwarted at every attempt to ruin and hurt those poor people that were already going through enough pain as it is. So today I just want to concentrate a little bit on talking about different things: spiritual victory, the promises of God, spiritual warfare, if you will. And I'm going to start by reading just a little bit of the first chapter of Joshua. And it says, "After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Lord spoke to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, therefore, arise, go over to this Jordan, you and all the people, to the land which I am giving to them, the children of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given you, as I said to Moses. From the wilderness and this Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, and the great sea, toward the going down of the sun, shall be your territory. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and of good courage, for this is the people you shall divide as an inheritance, the land which I swore to your fathers to give to them. Only be strong and very courageous, that you may observe to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may prosper wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, that you may observe to do according to all that is written in it. And then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have a good success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid nor dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." In times of war, it's absolutely imperative that you have good communication, good clear line of communication with your superiors. A bad communication system can spell disaster for any unit that's going into a battle situation. Proper two-way communication does numerous things, but one of the main things it does is it inspires courage, and it gives guidance, and it unifies the attack that's taking place. And that's something that's been nicknamed the grasshopper complex, from a book that was written when it comes to warfare. I actually found a lot of illustrations to use this time, because I finally opened that book, and then I found different things online as well. And here's one that I found that really tickled me. It said, "While on maneuvers, a battleship lookout noted a light in a dark, foggy night. After noticing the light's coordinates, the captain recognized his ship was on a collision course with the other vessel. Signal the ship, we're on a collision course. Advise you change your course 20 degrees. The return signal came. Advisable for you to change your course 20 degrees. The captain said, send, I am a captain, change course 20 degrees. The reply came, I'm a seaman second class, came the reply. You better change your course 20 degrees. By this time, the captain was furious. He yelled and said, send, I'm a battleship, change course 20 degrees. The reply came, I'm a lighthouse, your call. So the Bible says that we're in a spiritual battle that can only be fought with spiritual weapons. In order to know the strategy and the battle plan, we have to be in constant communication with our commander-in-chief. One of the great truths of the Bible is that it gives us encouragement during these confusing times, that we can both know and understand the voice of God. Our relationship with Him is and must be a two-way communication where we can express our love, desires, and our fears to him, and he will reciprocate with his love, assurance, and guidance and will for our lives. There's lots of Christians out there today trying to fight the spiritual battles with their communication system in total disrepair. They're not in daily contact with the Lord in prayer or any other way, and therefore they suffer from a spiritual fatigue, if you will. They're in effect fighting on their own without any direction, without any confidence. The voice that we listen to will determine the direction we'll walk. If we listen to our emotions, we only remain in a spiritual desert. If we listen to the whispers of the enemy, or Satan, we will be intimidated. If we listen to the voices of our critics, we'll only be distracted and discouraged. Only if we regularly hear the voice of God will we have the courage to do God's will and overcome the grasshopper complex. So let's go back to Joshua and consider the three commands that God gives to Joshua. Number one, let go of the past. I know we've talked about this before, but let go of the past. The book of Joshua begins with the statement, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now go. With Moses dead, Israel was still short of its goal. Okay? It was the promised land. And the option was open to them. They could either go into the promised land or they could stay where they were. They'd been in the desert and wilderness surviving for 40 years already. So they already knew how to do it, and most people tend to do with what they're comfortable with and what they know. So why go on? It wasn't God's will for them to remain in the wilderness. He had better things in store for them. He has better things in store for us. He had more for them than just the desert life full of frustrations. And God needed a person who would take the people forward. Joshua was his man. Now, Joshua was not content to just sit around with the present comforts. He wasn't happy with the status quo. He wanted to do something significant. And specifically, he wanted to do something specific and significant for the Lord. There's a story when Steve Jobs, who's one of the founders of Apple, was attempting to recruit John Scully. John Scully was a 38-year-old president from Pepsi-Cola. It was a tremendous challenge. And Steve Jobs looked at Scully and he said, listen, do you want to spend the rest of your life selling sugared water, or do you want to change the world? This is the choice they had. They had a choice. They could exist with things the way they were, okay? Or follow God's commands and accomplish great things for him. Now, this begs a question. Are we satisfied with living on somebody else's experiences with God? Are you satisfied with living with somebody else's experiences? Are we content to just make sugar water for the rest of our lives? Or do we wish we could do something that had some sort of eternal consequences? Sooner or later, each and every one of us are going to face a similar choice. We'll either press onward towards our spiritual victory and move into the promised land, or will we? If you're content today to just exist and just survive, then you'll need to be aware there's consequences for that decision. If you choose to just exist in your Christian life, and then you'll also experience the same problems that plagued Israel for 40 years as they traveled through the deserts, through the wilderness. You know, why is it important to choose the desert for Canaan? Well, first, it's hard to understand why anybody would want to remain in one place spiritually. At least it is for me. But it is a choice. It's a choice each of you have. If you're wondering where you are, here's some of the characteristics from when you live in a spiritual wilderness. And these are different things that the people of Israel went through as they were living 40 years in the desert. One of those things is restlessness. In the desert, Israel has no secure home. They never knew from one day to the next where they would lay their head. The Christian who opts for a desert style of life will remain restless in body, mind, and spirit. There are no restful Christians to be found in the desert. So they're restless. Next is discontent. Murmuring, complaining against God and his chosen leadership was an epidemic amongst the people of Israel. And if you look around the churches today, you'll find it's the same now. We're having the same thing now. No matter what God provided, it was never enough. Christian living in the desert will be preoccupied with its own troubles, with little strength to be able to fight the spiritual battles. So, there are no contented Christians in the desert. Another problem you'll run into is fruitlessness. Israel fought and won a few battles while they were in the desert, but they did not gain any advantage or territory over their enemies. They just fought, fighting for survival. The battles fought by the Christian in the desert are most likely to be characterized by rebellion rather than victory and conquest. There's no such thing as a fruitful Christian in the desert. Another thing you'll run into is negativity. There was little positive or negative about people in the desert. Christians in the desert are characterized by what they don't do. They don't smoke. They don't drink. They don't dance. They don't curse. They don't do whatever. But there's little else that distincts them from anybody else. Nothing that gives them a distinction in their lives. Their lives are notable for what they abstain from rather than from what they achieve. So due to that, there are few positive Christians in the desert. Another problem we run into is called vacillation. Vacillation. I like big words every now and then. It was no problem getting Israel out of Egypt. The challenge was getting Egypt out of the Israelites. Their life in the desert, think about it, was like a roller coaster ride. If things went well, they were great people and they were all confident in their faith. Now think about it. How many people do we know that are like this? When things were great, they were confident in their faith. And when things were against them, they whined and asked for leeks and onions and stuff like that. The Christian in the wilderness is like the person who's been turned down for a position in his company. The man has the qualifications, the experience to be promoted to whatever management position. However, his supervisor says he's like a thermometer and he goes up and down with the weather. You can't have somebody like that in a leadership position. So there's no stable Christians in the desert. God has so much more for Christians. He has so much more for us. God wanted them to move forward into a land flowing with milk and honey and not just be satisfied with the spiritual survival in the desert. But you know what? There's still some, even now, that say, but it's safe in the desert. We know what to expect. You know, a ship in a harbor is safe. But that's not what ships are for. That's not what we're for. Too many Christians nowadays are shackled by the regrets of their past. They're trying to run the Christian race by running backwards. And other Christians are distracted by the success in their past. And both can be a hindrance to achieving God's best. You're either so busy looking back at everything that you've messed up on, or you're too busy looking back on what you've done to look forward and see what you can do. Paul said it this way. He said, "This one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind." The choice is ours. It's yours and mine. God's looking for men and women, or a young person, who has a conviction to move forward. And then watch God move. Let go of your past and press towards the promise. The second thing that he commanded was to lay hold of his promise. What exactly do we mean by the promises of God? Is it wealth? Is it health? Is it power? Is it always being in a constant spiritual bliss? What is the promise God has for the believer? To answer this question, we need to identify what Canaan was to the people of God. And it was their inheritance. The promise given to Abraham all the way back in Genesis. And of course, to his descendants. His words were, "To you I give this land." Now, some have interpreted this promise to only be for Israel. And it was fulfilled when Joshua entered the land and led Israel to conquer it. Others have interpreted Canaan as being heaven. And after traveling this old world, God has a place prepared for us after we leave. The land of Canaan is also the picture of a spirit-filled life. That life that God has intended for every Christian to have. There's no exceptions to this. The spirit-filled life is not just for certain saints. It's not just for those special people. But it's provided by God for every one of his people. Beginning in chapter 1, we have a marvelously descriptive picture of it. He says, "Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over to this Jordan, you and all this people, to the land which I am giving them." The land is given to the people of Israel just as the life in Christ is available to you absolutely without effort on our part. In the third verse, I want you to notice, though, how the land has been given. It needs to be possessed. Title to it is the gift of God. Possession of it is the result of an obedient walk. It has to be possessed. Every place that the sole of your feet will tread upon, I have given you, as I said to Moses. The idea is you can have all that you can take. That's a pretty generous God. You can have every bit of a spiritual life that you want. Let me repeat that line. You can have every bit of a spiritual life that you want. You will never get any more. God will never give you more than you're ready to take. So if you're not satisfied with the degree of your real experience of victory, it's because you haven't wanted more. because you have all that you want. If you want more, go after more, and it will be given to you. Then the land is described as abundant and far-reaching, a land in which you will find all you need in every area of life, a land flowing with milk and honey. Now, just think about what he says. From the wilderness in this Lebanon, as far as the great river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites and the great sea. And I love this part. This is my favorite part of the whole thing. Toward the going down of the sun shall be your territory. That's a huge, towards the going down of the sun. So just look that way and keep looking, and that's all yours. Now, we do find that it's both a land of conflict and victory. But God goes on to tell him that no man shall be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. One of the first things we learn in coming into this place of walking in the Spirit is that although it's a place of conflict, every conflict can have a victory. God said, "Be strong and of good courage. For you shall cause this people to inherit the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and courageous." Did you notice when I read it that God put the promises all in the past tense? I have given it to you as I said to Moses. A little illustration came to mind that I found. A little boy came to the Washington Monument and noticed that there was a guard standing there. And a little boy walked up and said, "I want to buy it." And the guard looked at him and said, "Well, how much do you have?" And the little kid said, 35 cents. And the guy looks at him and goes, "Well, you need to understand something. First, 35 cents isn't enough to purchase the monument. In fact, $35 million is not enough. Second, you need to realize the Washington Monument is not for sale. But third, most of all, if you're an American citizen, you already own it." How often do we ask God for blessings that are already ours in Christ? It's already yours. You just haven't possessed it. You haven't taken it. Paul wrote, "Blessed be God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who has blessed us with every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places with Christ." The secret to walking in the blessing of the Spirit is simple obedience to his written word. An obedient heart brings the empowering Spirit. This is what life in the land of Canaan, in our promised land, is like. And the third thing he says is to live in his presence. The secret to living in the land includes both a promise and a presence. Do you suppose Joshua needed to be reminded by the Lord 3 times? When I read it, he had to be reminded 3 times to be strong and courageous. I mean, think about this. Obviously, his track record in the wilderness gave evidence that he was a confident man with faith in God. So why then did he have to be encouraged to be, not to be afraid? Well, first off, Joshua was Moses' servant. He wasn't his second in command. A lot of people make that confusion. He was just his servant. When Moses was considering a successor, Joshua didn't even come to mind. Caleb maybe one of his sons, but Joshua was a soldier. He was one of his generals. He was mostly a servant, an errand boy at times. And Joshua was content to be just that. He was comfortable in his own little desert. No one was grieved more when Moses passed than Joshua. And when the call for Joshua to succeed Moses was made, his heart probably skipped. He was probably like, what? Me? Be strong means that he must have felt weak. Be of good courage means that he was probably frightened. Be not dismayed means that he seriously considered whether he had the right stuff to accomplish the call. This is an encouragement to all of us. Who doesn't feel weak, frightened, dismayed at the thought of serving God? Man, I get it every time I get up in this seat. You start to get hot, you start to sweat, you start feeling that heat build up in you. How often do we use that excuse of, I'm nothing? I'm nobody. I don't have any talent. I'm too weak. Yet that's exactly what God chooses to use. Weak vessels like you and me. Listen to what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 4:7. It says, but we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellence of the power may be of God and not of us. The treasure is the Holy Spirit and the gospel of Christ. The earthen vessels are you and me. God chose to use weak, worthless, common clay pots, if you will, to empower his Spirit. This is in order that he would receive the glory and not you and me and other men. So God says, be of good courage. God does not ask Joshua to do something without the promise of being there to stand right with him. And this is still true today. God will not ask you to do anything without also being there, enabling you to do it. God will never waver in his promise to be with us. Jesus issued the same statement in Matthew 28:20 when he said, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you, and surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. There's a tribe of Native Americans that had a practice for training their young braves or young males. So on the night of the boy's 13th birthday, they would blindfold them, take them out in the dense forest, and then take the blindfold off of them and leave them out there the entire night alone. Don't know how they got there, where they're at. Now, until then, this young brave has probably never been away from the security of his family or his tribe. He's always been in a group or around a group within earshot of the group or sight. But on this night, he's blindfolded, taken miles away. And just think about it when he took off that blindfold. He's in the middle of the woods, by himself, all night long. I bet you every twig that snapped, you probably saw some wild animal, or nowadays we'd probably be thinking, oh my gosh, it's Bigfoot, just ready to pounce. Every time an animal howled in the distance, he imagined a wolf creeping up on him to leap out from the darkness. And every time the wind blew, he probably wondered what sinister sound it was masking. It was probably one of the most terrifying nights for any kid. And then after what seemed like an eternity, the first light of the sun would come up, the first rays would come down and enter the interior of the forest. And looking around, the boy would see the flowers and the trees and the outline of the path. And then, to his utter astonishment, he would see a figure of a man standing just a few feet away, armed with a bow and arrow. And it was the boy's father. He had been there with him all night long. The God who calls us will always be there beside us. This is God's commitment to you, to me, to all of us. God demonstrated this truth to Moses, to Joshua, and he will do the same for you and me. The Bible likens a Christian walk to a battlefield. I'm going to draw this in. In fact, Paul says that we are all in a spiritual war. And as wise soldiers, we need to arm ourselves appropriately. We need to put on our helmet, our breastplate, and everything else. However, all the armor in the world will be impotent if the communication line between the soldier and the commander-in-chief are in disarray. It's imperative that we listen to the right voice. There's the voice of the enemy, Satan, who roars like a lion, going around seeking whom he can devour. His voice tends to be loud, intimidating, and paralyzing. And if we listen to him, then we'll be frozen in our tracks and not move anywhere. Then there's the voice of the inhabitants of the land, the world that does not want the light of the gospel to expose its sin. If we listen to their voice, then we'll become distracted from the mission of God and that what God has called us to do. And then there's the voices of the critics in our own camp. Family, friends, co-workers. These are beliefs who you may have tried to go forward, but for one reason or another experienced failure. And now their attitude is they cannot enter in. There's no one else who can. If we listen to their voice, then we'll become discouraged and tempted to turn back and just get away from the conflict. But that leaves one final voice. It's a strong voice, a comforting voice. It's a challenging voice, but it's not an overbearing one. It's firm, but loving. It's God's voice. And he's telling us, as he told Joshua, to have courage. Do not be discouraged and be strong. God will always be with us. And with God, we will be invincible. We will never be without his presence. And he will never fail when we walk in obedience to his voice. So I hope that was encouraging to somebody. I'm not quite sure who that was for, because it came last night. But I hope everybody takes note that God will always be with us. He never leaves us alone, even when times are dark and it seems that way. And then there's people there to say, well, where was God when all this stuff took place at the nightclub? Well, I know he was there. And there's people who are going to say, well, why didn't he stop it? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But I can tell you that if you look, something good will come out of it if you just let God do his thing. So be strong, be of good courage, and move forward and take what God has promised you and possess the land. And be strong.